Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Byrnes. I was a newspaper journalist for over 40 years, working mainly as a foreign correspondent in Asia, and I'm the grandfather of Lena in year 4. I'll be talking with you today about how to write a newspaper story. Now, there are many different types of reports in newspapers, including commentaries, columns, book reviews, feature articles, personal narratives, business reports, and so on. But by far the most important are general news stories. So I'll be talking today about how to write news reports. Now, the first thing to ask about writing a news report is whether it is worth writing it in the first place. There are so many different stories competing to get into a newspaper, a large number every day end up on the cutting floor. So the important point about getting a story into the newspaper is that it's got to be about something important or interesting. Okay, well, it could be about both. Now, the next thing is we have to go out and actually get the story. Listening to other people tell you about something is nowhere near as important as getting out and seeing for yourself. So now you've gone out to the scene of the story, whatever it's about. You've got a notebook full of information that you've gathered about what has happened. This will be a collection of facts about what has happened, figures that help explain the event, and quotes from people who saw what happened. Now, a couple of important points before we can actually start writing. News reports are always written in the third person. That is, they are written about other things and about other people, not about yourself. So the writing is about he, she, or it, not about the first person I, or about the second person you. The first thing you see now when you look at a story in the newspaper is the big screaming headline. That's meant to capture the reader's attention and needs to be as catchy as possible. But it is the last thing that is written about the story we are covering, and it's usually not even written by the reporter, but by a sub-editor or the editor, based on the report that you as the reporter have written. So we'll leave that aside for the second, just for now, and start our actual report. The most important thing about any report is the first sentence. In journalism, you do not fool around, you get straight to the point. The first sentence is called the lead. It's what we pick out of your notebook, which is full of facts and information, and put the most important thing into the lead. When you decide on this sets the scene for the whole story. And the rest of the story should flow on nicely if you get the lead right. If you get the lead right, you will be famous by getting on page 1. But if you don't get the lead right, your story will be buried on page 27 or even thrown out altogether. Okay, so you've chosen the most important thing out of what we're covering. Let's say it's a car crash. Okay, there's a huge car crash in Shanghai. Your lead to this story is going to have to be about the car crash, obviously. So we're picking out the most important thing. So our lead will go something like this. Shanghai traffic was paralysed on Tuesday when 10 cars, a concrete mixing truck, supermarket delivery vans and a speeding ambulance crashed in heavy fog and peak hour traffic on Huangpu Bridge, killing 5 and creating widespread chaos. Okay, now there are 2 essential points about the lead. One is that if possible, it should contain the 5 W's. That's who, what, when, where, and why. In our example, 5 people were killed in the crash. That's who. What? That's the car crash. When? That's Tuesday. Where? That's Shanghai's main bridge, the Huangpu Bridge. Why? In our case, that's heavy fog and speed. The other essential is that the lead should be written in simple, direct words and not be too long. Our lead is 37 words. Try and keep it down to less than 50 words if possible. Okay, we've got our lead. Now we're rolling. Now I've said if possible, if possible, keep it down to less than 50 words, but every news report will be different. News reports are written about people, by people, and human events simply do not follow a rule book. So you follow the guidelines where possible, but don't be afraid of writing what you think needs to be said and writing it in a way that best explains what you want to say. Now, the only time when you might not put the most important point that's happened in an event into the lead in your story is if something very interesting has occurred, something so interesting that it beats the most important thing into the lead. Let's say a circus truck carrying 5 tigers was involved in the crash, and the tigers escaped to run wild through Shanghai streets. Now that's pretty interesting. Let's put that into our new lead. 5 wild tigers terrorized Shanghai on Tuesday after escaping from a circus truck involved in a multi-vehicle pileup on Huangpu Bridge, killing 5. You will notice that we've kept the fact about the 5 people killed in the lead. When people get killed in an event, that makes it important enough to get into the newspaper. But let's forget about the tigers. They were just an example of what might be an interesting event. So now we're back to the lead about the car crash. The rest of the story, the body of the report, should fall into line pretty neatly now, with the next most important or next most interesting thing following in order of importance. The second paragraph, or graph as is known in journalism, should give more details and some context. So the second graph of our report is the crash which brought transport and commerce to a standstill for 5 hours in Shanghai's biggest city was estimated by government sources to have an economic cost of tens of billions of yuan. The 5 killed are so far unidentified. Now, how did we know the crash cost the economy tens of billions? The answer is because we asked. We came back to the office from the crash scene and telephoned the Bank of China's media section and asked what the cost of the crash would be to the economy. They said they didn't know. Pretty standard for a big organisation like the Bank of China. So we telephoned other commercial banks and stockbrokers and asked them. One of the experts said tens of billions. So that's our story. Now that's the difference between a good report and an ordinary one, and between a good reporter and a lazy one. Okay, so now we've got some more context on the importance of the crash. Note that we also have more information on the deaths. That is, no names yet. Moving on to our third paragraph. The third paragraph should contain a quote, if possible, from an eyewitness. If you can get one, that's good enough. This is called the golden quote. A good quote really lifts a story up. It gives it life. So when we were at the scene of the crash, we interviewed the top policeman there. So our third paragraph becomes, and this is the golden quote, quote, "It was horrendous, the worst crash I've seen in 30 years as a cop." Sergeant Li Peng of Pudong Police Station said, "It made me sick. I puked up big." Okay, that's the end of the quote. Now the rest of our report should fall into place nicely from here, with everything written in order of importance. Okay, now we come to the end of our story. Now for the ending. If possible, you should end the story with an interesting twist, if you can find one. This is called the kicker in journalism. It means we've ended the story with a kick. How about this? Cleanup crews were stunned to find untouched boxes of chocolate and bottles of wine among the mess left behind by the crash. A gift from the gods, a nice end to a bad day. Head of the cleanup team, Hao Yi, said. Right, well, there's our story. Now we need the finishing touches. Firstly, the headline. How about this? As I said, the editor will usually write the headline, but we'll do it ourselves, just for the example. So how about this for a headline? Shanghai shutdown, bridge pile-up costs billions, kills 5. Okay, next comes the byline. You get a byline by Michael Byrnes. And then you need a place and a dateline. Wire service agencies always have a place and date line at the beginning of their leads. Most newspapers do not. They just start the story with the lead. But if you had to put in a date line, it would look like this. Shanghai, February 17, 2021, and then you go on with the lead. Shanghai traffic was paralysed on Tuesday, etc., etc. Now, tomorrow morning, when you open up your paper, this is what you see. That looks pretty good. That looks pretty good to me. Hey, that's me writing that. Wow, we did it. One more thing, sorry to have to say this, but you have to get it right. The story has to be right. You gather as many facts as you can. You check and recheck everything. The world is relying on you to get this right. Your story will be read by everyone, from members of parliament to government officials to shopkeepers to the neighbours next door. It will often be cut and pasted into files of clippings kept by libraries and by people doing research. It will possibly be reprinted around the world, and the information in your report could eventually find its way into books. You would be surprised how many books are written by authors collecting and rewriting newspaper reports. I am not exaggerating, this is true. So get it right. Okay, well, that's our car crash story. But how would we write a newspaper report when facts are not the most important thing, but when feelings or an unusual event involving really interesting people is the most important thing? How would we write that? Let's use the book you've been reading in school, Kensuke's Kingdom, as an example. Now, this is a great book, I think, with a strong adventure story and good insights into the unusual way many Japanese people think. Let's look at how to write a newspaper report about the rescue of Michael from the island. In Kensuke's case, finding the old Japanese man on the island, where he has been like a hermit for 40 years after World War II, is definitely very interesting. So let's try to get both the news point about Michael's rescue and the discovery of the old Japanese sailor into the lead of our story. Firstly, a couple of things will need to be tweaked. One is that a news report would have to give Michael's full name, which is not given in the Kensuke's Kingdom story. So let's give the name of the author, Morpurgo, to the boy Michael, just for convenience. We'll also need to tweak our report to the third person, he. So, how's this for a lead to our news report based on the Kensuke's Kingdom story? An 11-year-old English boy shipwrecked by fierce storms a year ago was miraculously rescued on Tuesday from a remote jungle island in the Coral Sea, northeast of Australia, where he was kept alive by a reclusive Japanese Navy seaman marooned on the island by a World War II bombing raid 40 years ago. Now, our lead combines the news point about Michael's rescue with the really interesting thing about the discovery of the old Japanese hermit. Our lead is 54 words long, a bit longer than our rule of less than 50 words for leads, but that's okay. We are not a prisoner of rules. Now for the second paragraph, one that adds more information and context. How about this? The boy, Michael Morpurgo, was rescued by his family, who had been scouring the southern seas on their sailboat, the Peggy Sue, in search of their son. The Japanese seaman, Navy Doctor Kensuke Ogawa, 75, so far remains on the unnamed island, inhabited only by orangutans and other wildlife, while authorities examine the case. And the third paragraph, the golden quote, I owed him so much. I'll start that again. I owed him so very much. He saved my life, fed me and befriended me. We were happy and I was his family, Michael said of Kensuke. Now, the body of the story follows on. You'll see on the screen that we have a paragraph next about the strange relationship between Michael and the hermit, and then a second paragraph giving details about Michael's trip before he was swept overboard, how he sailed to Africa, Brazil, and so on and so on. Then a quote from Michael's mother. Didn't I tell you we'd find him? Didn't I tell you? Michael's mother said after rescuing her son. And the rest of the story follows with events and quotes ranked according to importance and interest. And now for the kicker ending. Kensuke Egawa is vowing to never leave the jungle island he has called home. Quote, my world was Japan, long time ago. And now my world is here. I would be like ghost coming home. I stay on my island. This is Kensuke's kingdom. Emperor does not run away. Not honorable thing to do, Kensuke said. Well, I think that's an interesting thing, don't you? And one more point from me. Kensuke's kingdom is full of facts and figures that you can use in the report, but you actually have to dig them out from the really interesting I story. I wrote down more than a full page of information that could be used in writing a newspaper report on Michael's rescue. You would never be able to use all of this information in your report, but that's normal. Your reporter's notebook will always be full of more information than you could squeeze into the news report. Hang on to that notebook. It might come in handy for a feature article next week. Well, thanks for listening, everybody. I hope this was interesting for you. Bye.